People were quite upset with my last video when I reviewed the previous episode of Rings of Average Looking People. So, trying to keep things vague and spoiler-free as much as possible doesn't wash well because no one's really watching it, and this show makes the Acolyte look like Shakespeare. So let's just roast the hell out of it. Let's be honest, and let's just probably offend a few people and good. A show that has bred a fan base that deserve to be thrown in a wood chipper, who have openly tried to dox people, and any remote clapbacks to the hate they send you is apparently harassment. Ultimately, this show is garbage. Its fan base and the shills are garbage. People like Fellowship of Fans or Fellowship of Communists are also ultimately garbage. And if you want the honest truth, most of the people that watch this show just want to touch themselves to it. That's what I'm seeing. The Helladriel stands, the shipping. My god, it's like fanfiction.net as writing Twilight fanfiction. They're half expecting sparkly elves and a love triangle between boring Caucasian and boring slightly tanned Caucasian. So let's be honest, let's just go through this show and let's roast the hell out of it. I'm Will, I'm the host of the Bald Book Geek. Like, sub, do the usual, and if you want my unfiltered, uncensored, mind-numbing explosions, please head over to my Patreon or become a channel member for exclusive content that you will not see anywhere else. So, hi. I'm in an evil mood and I've had a really crappy week, so let's just roast the hell out of it. This show is just frustrating, and it continues to go down this horrible spiral of noise. What should have been a turning point in this show just feels like disappointment due to the dull storytelling, lifeless character developments, and a somewhat unoriginal plot that feels recycled from every other fantasy series that's ever existed on the planet. Xena Warrior Princess did this better. Let's be honest. And don't forget, it's using lines that were created for the Peter Jackson films and stuff that was not really in the Second Age, and it's just nostalgia bait. Right off the bat, the biggest issue with this episode is the pacing. It's painfully slow. Scenes are stretched out to their limits with no real sense of urgency, and what could have been thrilling cinematic ends up feeling like a filler, long drawn out scene, and it leaves the viewers wanting something that isn't going to happen. That's being really honest about it. Like, there is a whole thing of this episode that just honestly just feels like it's pointless. There's no payoff. There's nothing that happens. Actors are scene chewing and delivering their lines with all the passion of a dead fish. And then honestly, I'm sure if one of the actors opened their legs, that's what you would find at this point. Talentless, lifeless people that typically have the same personalities as people that work in Iceland or Tesco's or Walmart. And a Galadriel that seems to come across as the nice girl that shops in Waitrose called Laura who plays the cello. My god, the scene chewing is such a pain in this episode, and there is a clear difference between building tension and simply stalling, and Rings of Power falls into the stalling category. Rather than creating suspense, this episode feels like a slog of just boredom. And you know what? I'm going to say this. No matter how talentless the actors seem to come across, there's only one actress, there's actually only two people in this entire show I like. The Dwarven Princess and her husband. I think they are a hoot. Admittedly, I thought the dress that she wore in that stupid photograph was a little bit much, because, support is needed. But I think she is a hoot, and I would quite happily watch an episode that just focused on those two doing dwarven things. And you know what? Another major flaw in this episode is the characters feel at this point in the season. Like, there's nothing that happened. There's zero meaningful character development. The dialogue is uninspired and littered with predictable cliché lines you've heard a million times. Instead of deepening relationships or exploring new dimensions with these characters, they just recycle the tropes. over and over and over, and it ends up becoming this long-winded diatribe of talentless writers and directors that don't know how to do anything. The dramatic moments that this show tries to pack up don't pack the emotional punch they should. It's hard to care about these characters. Like just dumping in the ocean at this point, or a wood chipper. Like, the dialogue is robotic and their actions are uninspired. And you know what? Actors are only good as the writing around them. But come on. You have the rings of average looking people just staring at you. And a guy that clearly needs to get his jaw fixed because mouth breather Elron is firmly on show. The action sequences are also not just underwhelming, they're flat, to say the least. You think with a show this massive of a budget, the action scenes would be jaw-dropping, yet they fall flat. The battles are staged without any real tension or strategy, leaving the combat feeling lifeless and a mindless spectacle that just doesn't have any meaningful stuff behind it. And you know what makes that worse? The action sequences lack intensity and creativity necessary to captivate the audience. They look impressive on the surface but lack depth, making the battles feel like generic CGI noise, rather than a epic confrontation in the world of Middle-earth. The spectacle in this show is being put ahead of everything else. And you know what? Honestly, perhaps the most disappointing aspect of this episode it was unoriginal. Every plot point's borrowed from other more successful fantasy series or films. There's nothing new here. It's just rehashing ideas dressed up in pretty visuals rather than expanding the Tolkien-rich universe in any creative or innovative ways. This episode feels like a patchwork of old ideas that we've seen a million times before, and often done better. Let's be honest. This series, with such a beloved legacy that it came from, there was potential to create something memorable. Instead, keeping things reasonably spoiler-free, this episode leans so heavily into tired fantasy tropes, offering nothing fresh or bold. It's just meaningless scenes and a woman that, if you want the honest truth, shouldn't be let near horses because, my god, Animal Farm comes to my mind, and I'm not talking George Orwell. No one needs to have that face when riding a horse. And that's coming from someone who rides horses. Rings of Power Episode 6 is a glaring example of a show stuck in mediocrity. Dull pacing, lifeless characters, uninspired action, and recycled ideas that make this episode not just disappointing, but it makes it just another slog. The Acolyte was better written than this dribble. It's unfortunate, but at this point the show feels like it's spinning on wheels with no real sense of direction or creative spark. And honestly, I don't think the showrunners have the talent to turn things around. Two bad robot rejects who are sitting there, smiling, and telling that anyone who criticises the show is a troll. Maybe they need a wood chipper as well. Like, if you want the honest truth, I don't think the Rings of Power is going to end up being remembered as an epic story and Middle-earth and beautiful. It's going to be remembered as wasted potential. It's going to be remembered as a boring, lifeless slog. And I don't think they will learn from mistakes. We've got 3 more seasons of this show because they're contractually obligated to do it. And if they want out of this, they're going to have to pay a lot of money. And they're yet to make back the investment they paid for the rights. $1 billion TV show that makes Star Wars The Acolyte look good. And if you made it this far in the video, I have something very special coming up next week about Rings of Power that's just going to be all out for laughs. So be prepared for Benny Hill, funny, my immortal, and a oh so less than subtle roast. Bye guys.